Welcome to the Tzurba M'Rabanan Hilchot Shabbat Program with Rabbi Shalom Rosner. Tzurba is a revolutionary halacha sefer which guides you through over 300 topics in Jewish law in a unique signature style. In this weekly series specifically, Rabbi Shalom Rosner learns through the Tzurba Hilchot Shabbat volumes, helping us all master the Halachot of Shabbat in just 2 years. Tzurba volumes are available for purchase worldwide on Amazon. And to learn more about Tzurba, or for those in Eretz Yisrael looking to purchase volumes, please head over to tzurbaolami.com. For more information, see the description below. And now, Rabbi Shalom Rosner.
Okay, let's get into the next shiur. We are in Tzurba M'Rabanan. We are doing a new malacha, the malacha of Tofeir. We are in the Tzurba M'Rabanan Volume 21, which has many halachas, malachas that are lamaisa. We discussed ohel, asiyas ohel, and we discussed melabain in the last year. Today's year we'll do Tofeir, and then we'll do Korei'a, kosher and matir, kosev and mochek. All of these malachas, as we've said, 90% of malachas could come up in one's house. Out of 39, probably 34 could come up in one's house. Maybe there are 4 or 5 malachas that will never come up in the average home, but almost everyone is. Starting with the malacha of Tofeir. So Tofeir is the malacha of sewing. So what is it? We'll start on page 127. Again, this is the Lax family editions of the volumes of Tzurba M'Rabanan, and this volume is the Mervis family volume. And we will start with the malacha shiur number Gimel in this volume. Page 127, the malacha of Tofeir, the malacha of sewing. What is the malacha of Tofeir? So the Mishnah tells us in Daf Gimel. Remember, that's the Mishnah. That's the source of all lamites malachas. The Mishnah in the Bavli, Daf Ayin Gimel. Avos malachas arbaim chasar achas, 39 malachas. HaTofeir shtei tfiras. If somebody threads, two stitches with a needle, that is a malacha of Tofeir. And Korei'a, I'm not split for shtei tfiras. And Korei'a, which is the tearing, that's the opposite. Again, we'll get to Korei'a by the Shem next time, but this is the malacha. So the Gemara says, Tofeir, if I sew 2 stitches, says the Gemara, they're quoted in source number 1, Daf Ayin Daled, v'halo kayama. If I sew 2 stitches, if I take like 2 garments and I sew 2 things together, it's not going to last. It's going to just fall out. So v'halo kayama, it's not even temporary. It's nothing. We said sometimes there's malachas that are permanent, temporary, and not even temporary. I know, like writing something with pen is permanent. Writing on a fogged up window, that's temporary. Writing in the air is nothing. Right? That's nothing. So here says the Gemara, it's not going to last. Follow kaima. Answer: Amar Rabbi Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, v'hu shekashran. Well, you tied the edges. If you tied the edges together, so then it is permanent and it's not going to come out. The Mefarshim then ask, but then that's the malacha of kosher. Do you ever have the malacha of Tofeir without the malacha of kosher by threads? Right. So that is a question. What exactly is the difference between Tofeir and kosher? So if you think conceptually, you have it there from the Orcha Shabbos. Tofeir and kosher are really, in essence, 2 very different themes. Tofeir is taking 2 things and putting them together. You have 2 items. You have 2 garments, and you make them with thread or other unifying instrument, as we'll talk about. You make them one. Source number 2 says the Orcha Shabbos. Yesh me'achronim shadanu ma bein meleches Tofeir the bein meleches kosher. Right? Sometimes malachas are similar. Kosev and soveya. Remember, we spoke about a stipler in Masechah Shabbos. What's the difference between kosev and soveya? So here, what's the difference between Tofeir and kosher? They're both connecting things, aren't they? So what's the difference? You're connecting strings or ropes to each other. What's the ikr? What's the yesod of the difference? Says the Orcha Shabbos. The meleches Tofeir in yana chiber zulazu. Tofeir is connecting 2 sheets, 2 garments to each other. Whether you connect them with thread, or whether you just pressure them together and you glue them, as we'll see together. Any other way, connecting 2 things with a connector, that is Tofeir. Kosher is taking 2 edges to create a knot. That's different. You're creating a unit. Says the Achefsa. Says the continuing the Orcha Shabbos here on the top of 128. V'ilum lechas hakosher osekes bechutim v'chavalim. Right, that's involved with thread and strings. Sha'al yedei krichasam b'tzura misuyemes notzar kesher. tying them in a certain way, what we call a knot, so then that creates a kesher, creates a knot. V'zui malachas machsheves shel kosher. V'torah chilka es hapulos eilu beis malachas shonos. Two different malachas. Good. So again, Tofeir, the classic Tofeir of sewing things together is not so common on Shabbos. Most people aren't sewing on Shabbos, but there are very lemaisa examples of Tofeir that comes up. So Gemara in Shabbos Daf Ayin gives us one. Source number 3. What if there is something loose? Let's say on the edge of my garment. We're going to get to tzitzis. That's regarding kosher. But let's say I have a loose. If you look on the bottom of page 129, you see a picture there. You have a shirt whose sleeve, some of the threads of the sleeve became loose. If you pull a thread, so that tightens it. Pulling a thread to tighten a connection is the malacha of Tofeir. You are connecting the two items together. Even though you might say, it's kind of like grama, you're pulling over here and it's getting together over there. No, that's Tofeir. Says the Gemara Shabbos Ayin Hey. Amar Rav Tzurba Bar Tuvia. Amar Hamoteach chut shel Tofeir b'Shabbos. If somebody stretches and tightens a thread of a stitch, chayev chatas. That's a daraisa. Chayev chatas. I'm tightening. And the Shulchan Aruch quotes that. Chut shel Tofeir sheniftach. If I have a thread that opened, that became loose, Asur lamatcho. I am not allowed to tighten it, mishum Tofeir. Tightening a loose thread is just like threading in the first place. I'm connecting two sides, and that's a problem. The Mishnah Berurah says, and if you do this in a permanent way, it's a daraisa. And if you do it in an impermanent way, it's still a drabanan. That's what the Mishnah Berurah says in 5. Ava below kesher klal pater, it's still asur drabanan. And that's why the Shmir Shabbos summarizes and says, don't tighten things that became loose. Asur, source number 6. Asur limtoach chuto shel tefer shenisro feif kedei lahadik es tefer. You're not allowed to tighten the thread in order to bring the two sides together. Where else might this come up? A button. What if you have a button that's a little hanging down? A button became loose. So what do you want to do? You want to pull from the back in order to tighten the button to the garment. That's a problem. That's Tofeir. I'm tightening the connection. I'm not allowed to tighten the thread that connects the button to the garment, right? Because that would be a problem of tefira. But something that looks like this malacha, but it is not asur, and that is if somebody has a hood. Somebody has a hood, and sometimes the strings in the hood. Or let's say somebody's going to sleep and they're wearing sweatpants to sleep, and there's a drawstring to tighten the sweatpants, to tighten the hood. That's mutter. That's mutter to tighten it and to loosen it. Says the Yalkut Yosef, sruch. That's a thread, a string. Hamushchal biktsei kova shel me'il geshem. Right, it's in the hood of some type of raincoat. Mutter lemotcha olar posa b'Shabbos. That you're allowed to tighten and loosen. Av shebemitichaso akoveya miskavetz umishadek saviv larosh. Even though by pulling it that's tightened. So if I do that to a baguette, it's tightened, and that's the malach of Tofeir. And here it's mutter. Uparfayaso niftacha kavatz vahiduk. Ein lachush, no problem. Why? Because that's what we've mentioned in the past. Derech tashmisho. That's meant to be done and undone. That's not a true malacha. A true malacha is I clean something, I color something, I plow something, I shecht. But if something's meant to be done and undone, remember we said closing a door and opening a door. That's not a true malacha bona. Soveya. If I go outside and my glasses become sunglasses and then anything that's meant to be done and undone, like here, it's meant to be tightened and loosened. Right? If a sleeve is loose on a baguette, like in the picture here, that's not meant to be done and undone. It's meant to stay tight. If it gets loose, that's unusual, and therefore getting it back would be the malacha. But here, by a hood, right, that would not be a problem. So that's in terms of threads. Where else does Tofeir come up? So if you see the next page 130, safety pins. What about using a safety pin on Shabbos to connect two things together? So this goes back a couple hundred years. The Karban Hasanel, one of the classic commentaries on the bottom of the Rush, right, in the 7th parak there in Klal Gadol, says, in source number 8, he talks about some type of pins that seem to be something like safety pins. And if you look closely in his words, he doesn't say, it's asur. He doesn't say it's mutter. He just says, I don't understand why people do this. So it sounds like he wants to say it's asur, but he just says, he's tam on the minhag. From where does the world act leniently. Shetochvin im machat shekorin shteknadol. Right? They use this type of needle, this type of pin. B'lashon Askenaz hakrayzim amalbu shekorin shufza. B'lashon Askenaz harei havish de trifus. It's a pin that goes through, and it goes through twice, and that's Tofeir. The carbon is bothered by. V'chein hanashim b'Prague. K'shemachabrin hashel yirim amachtem alalu havish de trifus. I don't understand. How could they use this type of pin to connect two sides of a garment? Isn't that Tofeir? And the Mishnah Berurah quotes this. Mishnah Berurah quotes this in source number 9 in Siman Mem, which is talks about Tofeir. That's where the Mishnah Berurah, generalizes. Like if you look in source number 9, Agav nevar ksas din Tofeir. Let me explain a little bit more about Tofeir, says the Mishnah Berurah. HaTofeir shtei tfiras chayiv. That's the Mishnah. If you sew two threads, v'hu shekashur rosh yachod mikan u'mikan kadesh lo tishmod. If you tie two threads together, afilu lo hayasha kayama. Even if it's not permanent, it can still be d'Rabbanan, as we'll see. V'im hayashal kayama chayiv gam mishum kosher. V'koz eleni chiyuva. Avaleni nisura regarding the rabbinic, the din d'Rabbanan. Yesh omrin da'asur afilu lo asa kesher klal. If it's at least a temporary connection, so then maybe it's going to be d'Rabbanan even if you didn't tie it. Remember, that was the beginning, the first source we saw. If you tie it, that's going to keep it forever. But even if you don't tie it, if it's stable somewhat, that could be at least d'Rabbanan. And then he quotes the Carbon Asano, Osa Nashim Shetofen Akrais Mabeged Lav Shaper Avdis. The Carbon Asano, it sounds like putting a pin in a garment in two places, right? Tofeir Shteit Chifas. That is the malacha of Tofeir. And that would be a problem. That would be a problem, according to, so what about safety pins? So the Chazon Ish argues on the Carbon Asano. He's allowed to. He's an Achron. Chazon Ish says, and even the Carbon Asano never said Usr. He just was metama on the minhag. But says the Chazon Ish, this is not a true Tofeir. Tofeir means you put two things together, they become one. Here, it's clearly connected only through the pin. That's not the true malacha of Tofeir, says the Chazon Ish, source 10. Divrei Carbon Asano, Perek Zayin, the Shabbos, Tmuim. What's the Carbon Asano talking about? Asked the Chazon Ish. Da'tochev machat lahadek lefisha. If you just put a pin in to connect two things temporarily, hu kemahadik bekrosim. It's like using hooks. It's like two things holding hooks, two hooks holding something together. That's Tofeir. The Carbon Asano himself is made that everybody does it. And in the Carbon Asano's day, they were tremendous gedolim, and they didn't say anything. You don't see anybody else getting upset about this. And there were many wonderful Jews there that wouldn't want to violate, but this was the minhag. And he didn't even say himself that it's Asr. He was just metameh that it was the Mekel Minhag. And according to, if it would be Tofeir, it would be Chai V'chatas, but he does not think that, the Chazon Ish doesn't think that the Carbon Asano is correct. Alahacha, turning over, top of 132. There's that lashon. Chazuso mochiach alav. Its appearance reflects on it that this is not a true Tofeir. Nobody argues. Never the Chazon Ish does not think a safety pin is any type of problem at all. The Shiur Shabbos also says matter is a safety pin. He says maybe if you only have to put it in once, it'll be better. Right, so you don't even get into any issue at all. Shiur Shabbos in 11, mutter litchov sicha bebeged. One is allowed to put a pin in. Kedei lahat seiro, to tighten it to make it more narrow. O kedei lachaber shnei chelkei beged shenikra, or to connect two parts of a beged that tore. V'gam mutter l'shtamesh b'sichas bitachon. One could use a safety pin, but makom kaftor shenitlash. Let's say you want to close your jacket, so you can use a safety pin instead of the button. At least once, at most once. Trying to be a little safe. Rav Moshe and the Yalkut Yosef both matir straight out. They said this, like the Chazon Ish, this is not a true form of Tofeir. Right? Even the Yalkut Yosef Shalosh Tchifos. Right? Shalosh Tchifos. They quotes in a footnote here that Rav Moshe quotes a couple of factors. Number one, remember, Tofeir is about unifying two sides. If you have a pin in there, it's not unifying. It's not unifying. Some Achronim say, even the Chaz, if it's a tiny, tiny safety pin, which you don't see, and it just like it's in the back and it looks connected without the pin, then maybe the Chazon Ish would think that's also a problem. Maybe, but it doesn't look like it's connected. And also, Ramosha also suggests the Svara that maybe it's only Tofeir if undoing it would be Korei'a. And everybody agrees. Even the Karban Asana would say taking out a pin is not Korei'a. That's not Korei'a. That's just undoing a situation of connection, and therefore it would not be a problem according to many. Some posts can say again, if it's clearly going to be temporary, you're using it as a button, you're using it instead of some connector on a temporary basis, then that's for sure okay. But I don't know, maybe if you put it in, let's say a woman has a shirt and puts it on her shoulder to connect the two, and then when she takes it off, she could just put it over her head and then pull it and then put it on and take it off. Maybe if the same thing is going to be in there for a long time, maybe Yesh Lahachmer L'Chadchila. Even then, many posts can say it's Meikra Din Mutter. It's not a true form of Tofeir. But for sure, if it's going to come out very soon, then it would be okay. So that's in terms of safety pin. Again, the Karban Asana said maybe it's a Daraisa, but we said maybe it's even Mutter. What about, as we said before, Eina Shel Kayama? Temporary sewing, as we go now to page 130, 134. We will see, B'ez Hashem, in the Malacha of Kosher, that there is clearly a difference between Kosher Daraisa and Kosher D'Rabbanan. There's Kosher Daraisa, permanent Kosher, and Kosher D'Rabbanan, which is a knot that won't last so long. How long? We'll have to get to that. But what about Tofeir? Does Tofeir have the same distinction? If I'm Tofeir, like we said, some halachas, it's not relevant to talk about permanent and not permanent. Libun, right? If I'm a labein, I'm a labein. It's a question of whether it's going to stay or not. But what happens by Tofeir? Is Tofeir subject to that limit? So that's a machlokas we showed him. The Gemara says in Shabbos Daf Memches, some are familiar with this also from the beginning of Maseches Makos. Haposeach 13. Matir and Beis Hatzavar b'Shabbos avalo poschen. Sometimes when you gave a shirt into the dry cleaners in the days of old, they used to either knot the neck and the collar or sew the neck and the collar closed. So the Gemara says you can matir, you could untie it. You could untie it, avalo poschen, but if it was sewn together, you can't rip that open. Avalo poschen, why not? What's going on here? So this is a machlokas quoted in Agos Mordechai in Shabbos. In Shabbos, it's verse number 14, machlokas Riva and Rabbeinu Yoel. The Riva says, you know why you're allowed to untie, but you're not allowed to be Korei'a, not allowed to rip? Because only by tying and untying is there a difference between Kayama and not Shal Kayama. By Tofeir Korei'a, no difference. It's Daraisa anyway. Says the Hagos Mordechai, Riva Pirish, source 14. Beis Hatzavar, right, the Mishnah, the Gemara that said you could untie a Beis Hatzavar, but you can't rip open a Beis Hatzavar. What's the difference? Pirish Beis Hatzavar Shimnis Kasher B'Shah Kvisasan. If the cleaners tied up the collar matirin, so then it would be mutter to untie. Avalam Haya Tafur Pi Beis Hatzavar. But if it was threaded, if it was sewn, O Kamoshem Medbikin Rats Anim Zushal Midog. Sometimes shoes are sewn together. You can't undo it. Why? Here's his key line, the Riva. Shalom atzinu chilik ben tfira shal kayama l'tfira sheino shal kayama. By Tofeir, there's no chilik. By kosher, there's a chilik. But Tofeir, there's no chilik. It says, for Rafi Biyate, I'm not 100% sure. But there's no chilik. And that's why the Gemara has the distinction between matirin and poschen. Says the Mordechai continuing, Rabbeinu Yoel matir, I feel about tfira. You know, so no, he's matir even by tfira. Hov alalas kaim of it. No, you know what the Gemara is talking about? Poschin. That's a case where it was never opened before. If it was never opened before, that's a real. It was shel kayama. But if it was open already, it was just sewn a little bit. There's no difference. Rabbeinu Yoel and the Rashbam are both mekel. So machlokas we showed him whether tfira has the heter of going down of Eino Shel Kayama. The Shulchan Aruch in Shin Mem sounds like he paskins l'chumra. Sounds like he paskins like the Riva. Source 15. Osam shemahat kema begadim saviv zerosehem. There was some type of beged that we used to wrap around their arm with a thread. Okay, that's definitely durabon. That's definitely not kayama. It's not going to be there forever. Asur lamatcho. Shulchan Aruch says you're not allowed to tie in it. Elam ked yuhan akavim rechavim klas unless it ends up being very loose. and then it wouldn't be Tofeir at all. And the Mishnah Berurah explains. Mishnah Berurah explains that this seems to be like the sheet of the Riva. Dark on Oiliti and Chut betok beis yad shel zroo. They used to put this thing on their arm and then tie in it. So it sounds like the Shulchan Aruch is machmir, and the Ramah doesn't say a word. The Ramah is quiet, so it sounds like both the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah say Tofeir Eino Shel Kayama could be a daraisa. Could be daraisa. But if you look in the Ramah elsewhere in Shin Yud Zayin, not the Ramah in Shin Mem, where the Ramah doesn't say anything, but in Shin Yud Zayin, 2 days are quoted in the Ramah, and the Ramah seems to be Mekel. 2 days were quoted in the Ramah, right, earlier. So says the Ramah 17, the same type of case. You have shoes that are sewn together. You buy them from the store, they have a string between them. You can't cut it. Even though it's not permanent, it's meant to be undone right when the customer gets it. First day, because, well, there's no difference. Even if it's Eino Shel Kayama, it's still usher by Tofeir. V'yesh matirin, and then he quotes the Rashbam and Rabbeinu Yoel. V'yesh matirin b'tfir she'eino shel kayama. Some say it's mutter. Ve'en lahatir b'fnei ha'aretz. And don't open it in front of someone who's lax in halacha. Meaning, it sounds like it is mutter me'ikar adin. You don't want to do it in front of somebody who might take a slippery slope and do even more. But that is the suggestion of the Ramah. Let me just put in the plug here because I'm getting on a little low power. So I'll just add in a little, just plug this in, and then we will continue. Sorry about that. So says the Ramah. The Ramah quotes 2 different dayas, and the second daya is, it's whole like, the Meikar Adin, it is mutter. So the question is, the Ramah seems to be Mekel in Shin Yud Zayin in source number 17, but earlier in 15, the Shulchan Aruch is machmir, the Ramah didn't say a word. So do we pass him like Meikar Adin? So Achronim have different suggestions. The Tilul David says maybe the difference between Korei'a and Tofeir. Korei'a and Tofeir. The Tilul David in source 18 says maybe that he's saying only Tofeir of Tofeir Eino Shel Kayama is a problem, but Korei'a Eino Shel Kayama is mutter. Maybe that's the difference between the two, he says. Shlomo Zalman assumes that the Ramah is Meikar Adin. That's what the Ramah says. That's his real shita in Shin Yud Zayin. The Shiur Shabbos quotes the Ramah. Quotes Shlomo Zalman in source 19. V'shamati Yigon Shlomo Zalman Oyerbach. Da'afta b'simin Shin Yud Zayin Sif Gimel Mu'es Rishon Dasa Osrim Avo Mekivan Shebeis Yosef Ramah, and he quotes the Beis Yosef also. Hosifu al Divrei Rabbeinu Yoel Shlo Lahakav B'fnei Ha'aretz Mashmash Kenichriya Ladina. So the Shlomo Zalman assumes L'Kula Meikar Adin. The Chazon Ish assumes 20, Sibik Kufnun Vav, L'chumra Meikar Adin. He assumes that even though he had a kula beforehand about the safety pins, but the other Chazon Ish assumes that we don't have any evidence about Tofeir and the Gemara being more lahakel, and we have Beferish, the Shulchan Aruch in the earlier source that was quoted in Siman Shin Mem. He only quotes the Das L'chumra, and the Ramah quotes the 2 dayas elsewhere, but he assumes that maybe Meikar Adin, it would be a problem. What else could we talk about when we spoke about Tofeir and safety pins and D'Rabbanan? What about other ways of connecting? So page 138, gluing something together, that's a problem. That could be a daraisa. Taping 2 things together could be a daraisa. Stapling 2 things together could be a daraisa. All of these are connectors. So the question that we're going to deal with is, what about sticky adhesives like a Band-Aid or diapers? Again, most diapers today are Velcro, so it's different. But even not so long ago, diapers were sticky. They had the sticky adhesive, so when you open it, so there's three stages you have to talk about. Opening the diaper in the first place, because it's closed with this adhesive. It's been closed for a long time, since they made it in the factory. So that's number 1, opening it, and then closing it when you put the diaper on the baby. And then when you remove the diaper, closing it into a nice neat package before you put it in the garbage. So those are the 3 stages that are spoken about in the poskim about using these stickies. Again, if one has Velcro, like most are today, then this is not a shaila that is relevant, because as we'll see, generally Velcro is, especially Velcro that's Einu Shel Kayama is going to be not going to be a problem. But Band-Aids, the same issue. A Band-Aid that's sticky adhesive. So what do you do? So number one, the Aruch HaShabbos discusses stage one, meaning detaching the protective paper from the adhesive section on the bandage, or unfolding it. That's in source 23. B'shimush b'ispallanis yeshtam chashashos akshalom lechas tover v'korei'a. Hasaras niyar, top of 139. Hasaras niyar davuk b'kseo ispallanis hilachor begeder hafradas hadbaka. Right, when you open it, or when you open up a Band-Aid, you take off the papers. Isn't that, we didn't get to Korei'a yet, but isn't that undoing, as we'll see, a Tofeir? And then when you put it back on, when you put the Band-Aid on, isn't that Tofeir? If you're sticking it on. So says the Aruch HaShabbos here in source 24, he assumes that many poskim disagree about this, but he quotes Svaras Lahakel. Svaras Lahakel, why? Again, stage one, opening up the sticky adhesive in the first place is mutter, either the older version of the diapers or a Band-Aid, taking off the sticky adhesives. Why? So he quotes two svaras. Number one, benidon ze hadbakas haniyar al gabi espalonis nas darak ad shas psicha. When they close it in the factory, how long did they have in mind that it should be closed? Until the customer gets it. If the customer would get it in 2 hours, that would be fine with them. It just so happens that it's in the factory and the customer's only going to get it in 4 months from now, but that's not called kayama, because the kavana of the one who made it, it could have been for an hour. He wasn't doing it for that reason, to have it for so long. Nasta rakat shas hapsicha ve'ein regilus lachzor lahadbikas haniyar aktzeis palanis. And you open it, and then you're not going to stick it again exactly on the spot. So number one, maybe it wasn't called closed in the first place, and also ein la hadbaka ziyar agabi espalanis ein sham hadbaka klal. It's not even called a connection. What they do, they just closed it in order to protect it for when it's open later on. They didn't tie anything. They didn't sew or glue something together. That's not really. They just closed it for protection purposes. But that's not a true situation of Tofeir. So that's why generally the minhag of most is to assume, again, in the diapers of old, is to say there's no problem. There's no problem with that to undo it. Again, there's Rav Yashiv is machmir, but most are mekel. Number one. Number two, next. What about putting the diaper on the baby? Putting the diaper on the baby using these sticky adhesives. So again, the Aruch HaShabbos says that's not shel kayama. It's whenever the baby's going to soil the diaper, you're going to take it off. So that's not even in the D'Rabbanan realm. Remember, according to Tofeir, many poskim, we saw Rav Shlomo Zalman says maker a day we paskin l'kula, and even if you want to say l'chumra, maybe this isn't even in that category of einu shel kayama, because you're going to take it off soon. Says the Aruch HaShabbos 25. Hadbakas hamadveko shal gabe chitol bizman nesinas al guva shal tinok yesh bo l'char chashash shal tfira l'zman katzar. Is it Tofeir for zman katzar? Maybe you're machmer in that shayla. Amnam yesh lomar shekivan shadbaka zu asuya ba'ofan shrita leposcha v'lakor l'sogra. Maybe this is like derech tashmisha, like we said before. Remember, meant to be done and undone, like a safety pin is meant to be done and undone. And here too, it's meant to be done and undone. You close it, you open it, you close it, you open it. That's the derech of the diaper. It's not a true connection, and therefore he says, Das Rabim Miposkis Manenu, there is no issue. Again, Rav Havadia also quotes in Yechavadas, one is allowed to use the diapers with the sticky tabs. They're not meant to be left taped permanently, but once you take the diaper off, it's not a problem, and therefore it will be mutter. That's what he says in 26. L'chara b'didon didon shemadbikin espalanas alabeged aval b'sheina l'kiyum yish lahachmir. Oh, because we saw it before, the Shulchan Aruch maybe holds l'chumra by einu shel kayama, but then he says mikol makom, since at the end kivan sherabim me'aposkim matirim. Many say even the Shulchan Aruch is mekel even einu shel kayama. For sure, here where it might not even be that. Yesh lahakel. The Shiur Shabbos also matirs putting on the diapers. Titulim. Again, this is all the diapers that used to have the sticky things. Again, not so common, not as common today. Sheish b'hem eged hamiyuad lahad bakasam b'zman hashimush v'chulu describes the whole diaper. V'kodem hashimush b'hem poschem es ha'eged. Maker did its mutter. Goes maker did its mutter. He says you want to be machmir and open them before Shabbos. For the step 1, you could do that, but what are you going to do with step 2? There's nothing lechumra how you could do. The only thing is, what about the third stage? After you change the baby, so many often close up the diaper to be in a nice neat package, maybe so it doesn't leak, and then put it in the garbage. So there already, that's good. That's might be, some folks can say that's shel kayama, and maybe there one shouldn't close it, because that's going to be permanent, right? The Aruch HaShabbos says in 28, "Bizman asaras hachitul me'atinok yesh lizar shelo lakaplo ulahadbiko mishamat baka zunish eres laolam." Right, this is going to be there. It's going to be there. And the Yaakov Yosef also, he quotes Shlomo Zalman that says, even here, you don't really care. You're closing it until it gets into the garbage bag. Once it is in the garbage bag, do you really care that it's going to be closed like that? So there is makom litzadid lahakel, but there are those that say that's a good chumrah. It's a good chumrah to take upon oneself. What other cases of Tofeir are there as we finish up this topic? So Shmir Shabbos says, again, these don't come up that often, but Tofeir, gluing or taping a page that got ripped. Because you had a bencher, right? You want to glue it together, tape it together. That would be Tofeir. If you have connecting two sides of something, Daf shel sefer asur lechaber chelkei daf ka'ele b'niyar devek v'chadomer. Right, putting two things together. The Pnei Halacha says stapling two things together is a problem, but a paper clip is okay. Paper clips. I use paper clips in every shiur. So the Pnei Halacha says asur mi'ator lechaber b'niyar asur de mahadek sichos. A stapler. Right, you don't say metal and metal. It's two different things. A stapler is a problem. You have two holes, the staple grabs them together. You could put two papers next to each other. Right, an office pin. A paper clip, since that just holds it together and doesn't connect them. It's not really a connection like a stapler. Good. Velcro, as we said before, Velcro, Rav Ribiat says, Velcro is mutter. Velcro is derech tashmisho. Done and undone, right? That's a classic derech tashmisho, and therefore one could use Velcro fasteners, shoes, clothes, slip covers, any of the Velcro. There is a discussion, what about zippers? Most poskim matter zippers also. Derech tashmisho is meant to be done and undone by a zipper. There are those that say if something's going to stay in zippered for a long time, in the days of old, when I used to live in Chutz La'aretz, we used to have a raincoat, a trench coat, and there's a lining in the trench coat. So in the winter, you wear the lining and you zip in the lining, zipper it in. And then in the spring, maybe you'll just wear the trench coat you take out. So there you could have something zippered for a long time, for weeks or months at a time. So maybe that's a good chumrah. They shouldn't do that zipper. But there are those that say it doesn't matter, right? If you're going to close a door, even if the door's going to be closed for 6 months, it's not going to be bona. So in the footnote here, it talks about zippers. But that is another form. What about magnets? That's a big machlokas haposkim. If you look here in the Shmir Shabbos and Rav Ribiat are machmir by magnets. They assume maybe a magnet is a connection, and putting, let's say, something on the refrigerator and magnetic holding it together, maybe that would be a form of Tofeir. Asur lahatzmin kol davar magneti al gabe guf magneti kol mekarer imam daita lahashir also. If you're going to leave it there. If you're going to undo it in an hour, within 24 hours, then it's for sure okay. But he quotes Rav Nissen Karelitz and Chutashani, Rebelsky assume that that's not a real connection, and therefore it would be okay. What about the Post-its, or the little papers that people use to keep their place in seforim? So you have a picture of them in the bottom of page 144. So Rebelsky assumes or first he quotes from the Shabbos home, Simcha B'num Kom, that should be a problem if it's going to be there for more than 24 hours. Because it's sticky, it's connecting. What are you connecting? The two things. You're connecting the paper and the page in the book. So Maker Adin, Simcha B'num Kom thinks it's also. Rebelsky assumes Maker Adin should be mutter. Maker Adin should be mutter. Maybe better not to in front of because people could take it and run with it because maybe it's not a true connection. Shmir Shabbos says that if one uses them normally, so then it would be mutter. But he does quote, maybe you should take them off the pad before Shabbos. Why? Because it's already connected. If you look at the Nishma Shabbos, he assumes it's mutter lechatchila. You don't have to worry about that. It's not 100% clear what the Shmir Shabbos means by taking them off. Maybe because that original putting them in where how you buy them, that is a permanent. Maybe that's more permanent, so you have to undo that. So not 100% clear, but it's a big machlokas at poskim. Many poskim are mekel. If you put it in and undo it back and forth all the time. If you know somebody's going to be there for a long time, so maybe that's better. Maybe it's better not to. But again, the Shmir Shabbos says maker a din. If it's there for a short amount of time, it would be allowed. So these are some of the issues relating to Tofeir. You have a nice summary of all of these cases on page 146. But next time we get into the flip side, the malacha of Korei'a, the malacha of tearing. We will stop here.